guest today is Pat Blashill. Pat is an American author, photographer, and former music critic known for his raw, intimate documentation of the Texas punk scene in the 1980s. A native of Austin, Texas, Pat began photographing bands like the Butthole Surfers and Scratch Acid during his youth, capturing the gritty emotional intensity of the underground music world. After earning a degree in journalism from the University of Texas, he moved to New York in 1987, where he wrote for Spin, Rolling Stone, and The Village Voice. In 2005, Pat relocated to Vienna, Austria, where he continues to write, take pictures, and teach in a public high school. His published works include 1996's Noise from the Underground, 2020's Texas is the Reason, and the recently released Someday All the Adults Will Die. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome the Revolutions Per Movie, Pat Blashill. Hi, Pat.
Hi, how's it going?
I'm doing very well. There's so much to talk to you about because your book is big like Texas. It is fascinating as a kid who was into hardcore music in the 80s. I was just always amazed at the music coming out of Texas because to me, Texas represented, 80s conservatism and cowboys. And then here's like these incredible bands that are pushing so hard, and in your book, I was really fascinated. Both Gary, Floyd, and King Coffee said some really illuminating things about Texas.
Yeah.
Gary said that there's something about Texas that makes you want to be honest with yourself. That's one of the things I always loved and hated about it. It could have been my own heart beating the way that it beats a Texas beat. It's a brutal honesty, but in the end, it's always best. And then King says that they were paying tribute to their culture by playing all the tropes of Texas because it is their birthright. But as punks, it is also our right to want to destroy it. And I thought those two quotes were so amazing. So what was a pre-punk Pat feeling in Texas before you found that scene?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't gotten that one before. I was a hard rock kid. They didn't really call them. They called us stoners, but they didn't really call us metalheads. That phrase wasn't in use yet. But I liked Led Zeppelin, Nazareth, Deep Purple. I liked all that stuff. But I also liked some of the cosmic country that was in Austin, and I think I possibly liked it because it was homegrown. But those weren't concrete or articulated thoughts. I don't really think I had as much anger as some of the people that were in punk and they were on stage, but I certainly did have my anger, and I had a lot of class issues and still do. So I guess, there was some latent qualities about me that drew me to punk, I suppose. But I was always also just a music head. I liked a lot of different music. At the first, it followed a fairly standard pattern. I listened to the Beatles when I was like 5, loved the Beatles, but then started listening to hard rock, and then also just some weirder things. I discovered Roxy Music and Mott the Hoople.
Sure.
That was kind of left of center, and wasn't a big Bowie fan or a Black Sabbath fan. Sabbath was too scary, and Bowie I just didn't quite get.
Sure.
But that some of that really set me up for punk, and then I was always looking for new stuff. I heard Cheap Trick, and I thought that was punk when I heard Cheap Trick.
Yes, right there with you.
Yeah, and they're a great band, but I don't think you can really argue that they're punk. Maybe proto-punk, pre-punk, but so yeah, I just kind of ended up on this path that led me to a place where I could where punk sounded great to me, and Texas punk in particular.
Yeah, there's a great story in your book, before punk kind of takes over, Austin, at least the second wave, you would say, with like Big Boys and the Dicks and stuff. But Steve Collier is talking about, who's in the Big Boys, is talking about seeing DEVO and SNL.
Yeah.
And then getting obsessed with them, and then calling his high school girlfriend and to tell her he likes DEVO, and she starts crying.
Yeah.
She thought he was ruined. And I just was like, wow, yeah, music really could freak people out.
Yeah. Yeah, and Steve's story I love, but I mean, I had a similar experience. Just doesn't have quite quite as good a punchline. But I had a girlfriend that found out that I liked DEVO, and she just couldn't believe it. She thought they were just like sacrilegious even, and she
Right.
turned out to be. She had a much weirder later life and chapter, so she was probably headed for some weirdness herself. But yeah, DEVO really got under people's skin. I mean, I still kind of find that a little hard to believe. I mean, I think they were weird, but people were like kind of shocked and offended by them somehow. And other bands could do that too. So yeah.
So your introduction, if I understand it right, was being invited to a Big Boys show in '79
by Steve.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then it was kind of off to the races. And you even took a photograph that night, right?
I did. I did actually take photos the first night that I went to a punk rock show, and that was the Big Boys. But I don't think those photos are very good. There's one of them in the book, but it took me a while to get to be what I would call a good photographer. It took me a while.
What were you taking photos of before you were in the scene?
I was really influenced by Robert Frank.
Oh, sure.
And Walker Evans, and I don't really know if I tried to imitate those guys, but I also looked at a lot of other people like Man Ray and Harry Callahan, Diane Arbus, Lee Friedlander. So I looked at a lot of people that were kind of arty documentarians, and I really was just started off by taking pictures of kind of weird still lifes. I remember a picture I took of a life preserver floating in an empty pool in winter, and it's kind of lonely, angsty sort of stuff that an adolescent would find interesting. Some of those
Sure.
some of the pictures are okay, but it was kind of moody stuff, and it was probably fairly generic,
Through an adolescence lens, of course.
Yeah. So
right.
I was learning. I still like some of those pictures. And then I did a lot of kind of street photography. And as I was starting to get better as a punk photographer, I was also learning and doing some sort of more what you would call a little bit more traditional street photography and photojournalism. And I liked all that too, but the difference with the punk photography was it was one subject, and I was close. I was a participant as well as an observer. So that's one of the reasons I think those pictures are better.
Was there a sense of, as you're starting to document the scene, like where you needed to be? Like if you go see the Dicks, you kind of like, this is where I need to be, or I'm going to see the Big Boys. This is where how do you figure out where your presence is going to be? Because I'm also assuming at the time they may not, even though they know you, they may just be like, get off the stage, like we're trying to rock here. I don't know.
Steve Collier and a couple of other people that I met early on kind of, it's like a domino effect. Steve invited me to that show. It was the Big Boys. They saw me there as Steve's guest. So the Big Boys were sort of like thinking, okay, maybe this guy's all right. He came with Steve. And then I showed up at other shows, and then there was always another one or two people here and there that would see me around and think, well, maybe that guy's okay. So people started to trust me, and I was just lucky that way.
Yeah.
But I think that in terms of knowing where to stand, the best advice that I ever got on that was from actually an art photography teacher who said that it's a good idea to, when you're shooting, let's say you're at a party, get into a place, frame up on a certain part of the room or a certain composition where things look good, even though nothing is really sort of happening at the moment. And then just stay there and wait till things pass in front of your camera. Something will happen. If you have a good composition and you just wait for people to move through or action to come to you, that sometimes works. And for me, that worked like a charm.
It's an interesting era right now that we're in terms of, legacy and honoring legacy.
Yeah.
But, Chris Cates in your book, who was the bassist in Poison 13 and the Big Boys, said that, nobody knew that this was going to be important. This is just all crap we were doing as young people, not thinking about posterity. And I mean, when you were taking the photographs, did that feel like that to you? Like, this is a moment. I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I just need to be here to document it for me. Or did you feel maybe there's a bigger picture here that might matter at some point?
I don't feel exactly like Chris feels. I love Chris's comment, but I did think that my pictures were a thing. I don't know what thing I thought they were, but I did think that the pictures that I took were a series or a magazine article or maybe a book. I think I fantasized that they were a book, but it was a long time after I took the pictures that they became a book. I got distracted by life. But I thought the pictures mattered, and I knew that some of the bands had like national sort of or regional reputations. And of course, by the time you had somebody like the Butthole Surfers, I knew that they were sort of they were becoming sort of renowned or infamous. So I thought to myself, some people outside of Texas will care about these pictures. And I was also at that point, 85, 80, 84, I looked at enough photography to know that my pictures were good, and were something that on their own merited like attention. But yeah, I didn't have an idea then that Texas would really matter to people 40 years later. I thought the pictures were good, but I wasn't sure that the music would carry and would matter to people for this long. And I'm really, really glad that it has. And the research that I've done and the music that I didn't hear back then that I've heard since while I was working on the books makes me understand why it's lasted, because there was a lot of exceptional music, and not just in Austin,
right.
but Dallas and Houston and Corpus Christi and Killeen.
Oh yeah. I remember getting some cassettes from punk bands and maximum rock and roll from Corpus Christi and being like, first of all, that is like the most evil sounding name of a city I've ever heard. Sure. And then when I toured there, I was like, I get it.
Yeah.
What about early bands like the Huns or Sharon Tate's Baby that were like less documented, but really kind of set a tone? Especially it seems like the Huns, who were like super angry, super unrehearsed, and very provocative and ready. Like when the Police show up to basically 3 songs in at their first show, and the Police start breaking things up, and the lead singer just kisses a cop, and then everyone, there's like a bunch of people arrested. This is just lore. So how were you able to pull that into your book?
Well, I mean, that incident, the Huns riot, they called it, that, there were so many people there, and it was in the papers, and it made like international headlines. It was actually in Rolling Stone and I think the English music press. I think it was like an NME or Melody Maker or something. So, it was kind of like a footnote to history type of articles, but it did sort of it did make an impression on people. Maybe because this idea of punk in Texas was just so surprising to people. It shouldn't have been, because the very conservative and radically conformist nature of Texas is what provoked such wild punk rock music. I think it was a reaction to punk in Texas, was a reaction to all of that real suffocating conservatism. So I think that there is some, on my part, just as a kind of, from a philosophical perspective, there is some regret and sorrow that some of the early groups didn't get more documented. I wouldn't really pick the Huns or Sharon Tate's Baby as the groups that needed to be, known more. I love the Next. The Next were fantastic. And there is, thankfully, there is a 4-song EP by them that I think is also super good. Make It Quick, it's called. The Next was really important. I really liked a noise group called Radio Free Europe. They're also in the book, and they included a filmmaker who had a promising career in front of him, but then died suddenly from, I think it was a spinal meningitis. Yeah, those two bands. I think the next Radio Free Europe. There was a nice young group called the Buffalo Gals. I think the reversible chords, were also super great. They have a kind of a cult fan base. People know about them, but I would say those were the early groups that I thought were really good that didn't quite get the attention that they deserved. But shoulda, coulda, woulda. I mean, we didn't in Austin. We didn't have a great. We had an okay studio or two, but we didn't have one, amazing label or one Butch Vig, Jack and Dino type of producer.
Sure.
That was like going around, like, sort of documenting the sound. So that was just our bad luck, but we had the talent. So, 1 out of 2 is not bad. 1 out of 3.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because there is documentation. You have your photographs. There's when the Dicks and Big Boys and like Terminal Mind start showing up, there is some video documentation.
Yeah.
And there's an amazing show that the Big Boys are doing outside that Terminal Mind are playing.
Yes.
And I love in your book how angry the lead singer of Terminal Mind is that people are wanting to dance to this danceable music. Stop dancing, listen to the words. And I'm like, every city had that guy. I love it.
Yeah. Well, and you might remember that he later on reveals that one of the things he was mad about was his dad was a preacher, and he had spent his life trying to make get his dad's approval. And I for me, these are those kind of poignant notes throughout the book where people talk about their families and what they come from, and how in some cases they were still, even though they were making really crazy punk music, they were still trying to connect to their parents and to try to relate to people they'd grown up with, their birth families, even though they'd already sort of started operating within their chosen families. And I just think that's super moving. I think that's super poignant. It's not, I wouldn't say it's sad, but family is so important, even after you feel like you might have burned some bridges, and I like that story that Steve from Terminal Mind told too. And by the way, I also thought Terminal Mind was great. I thought that they were an early band that was really good. I do think that, like some of the other early bands, they were a little derivative. And that was kind of derivative was the line in the sand for me. If a band sounded like a group from somewhere else, then I was sort of like good, but not stellar.
Right. You're Talking Heads. You're the
right. Heads had a real out. It's funny you mentioned them. They had an outsized influence in Austin and some of the new wave groups, and I suppose some of the other groups too. Some of the English groups had an influence, and so sometimes bands would sing with an English accent, and I was just like, no.
Yes.
Even then, I thought that seemed weird. It just,
It's so funny. People I've interviewed over the years on this show, I do get asked, like, okay, you're in a post-punk band in New York in '78. You just come back from England. Did you sing with an English accent? They're like, oh, hell yes, I did. They're like, of course I did.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. And it's totally understandable. I mean, that's what people do. I mean, there's like
they're hearing it. So they're hearing, like PIL and Gang of Four. So then they're like, oh, that's how you say the. I'm going to say the.
Yeah.
So can we talk a bit about Raul's being kind of the centerpiece of the Austin club scene?
Yes.
Was it really the only kind of venue that was the most accepting of what was going on in this scene in terms of letting just bands do their stuff?
Yes, at first, but it wasn't alone for long because other clubs opened. People got, opportunistic or whatever, but people recognized there was a crowd that was going to these shows, so they might go to a second club, and it was an island for a little bit, but then some other places opened up. It was ideal in a lot of ways because, for example, a club that opened up a little farther downtown, called Club Foot, had a higher stage, and Club Foot quickly started pulling all the English touring groups, and I saw great shows. In fact, perhaps one of the best shows I ever saw, I saw at Club Foot. But the thing about Raul's was the stage was about a foot high, and for interaction and for photos, of course, that's much better because, the audience is right there with the band. So Raul's made an impression because I realized that, you could just reach right out and touch the singer, and some people did.
Yeah.
And, that's what was great about it. But it wasn't alone for too long. And some of the other things that came along were also great. I mean, for some reason I got some really good photographs and had really good time in '84 at two different places that weren't open for very long. A place called Voltaire's Basement, which was really just the basement of a bookstore. And then a place called Uncle Susu's, which was kind of like right on Fraternity House Row. So, trouble was brewing as soon as that started.
Oh my God. Yeah. There's that great story that Tim Kerr talks about. He's hanging out with Buff, the bassist of the Dicks. Yeah. They're standing outside Raul's talking, and he says, without missing a beat, these frat dudes came by in a car, threw a beer bottle at them. Buff catches it, turns around, throws it back at the frat car. It smashes out the back window, and then he just finishes the story. Like, just another day at Raul's.
Buff was like a superhero, like a negative superhero. He was like, he had punk superpowers. He was super scary.
In your book, everybody is like in awe and scared of him.
Yeah, he was scary. I don't know. The only thing that I could say is that his wife to be, the girl that ended up marrying him, she saw through it. But he was very intimidating dude, and Glenn from the Dicks was a little less intimidating, but he was just also pretty unpredictable. Pat was somewhere in the middle, and Gary was just so angry. Gary was on stage, and he was like, he was channeling all this rage. He said to me, when I finally interviewed him years and years later, he said that he was surprised that people were scared of him, but I wasn't. I wasn't surprised at all. I saw the Dicks' first show at the punk prom, and I didn't see them for a long time because they were so freaking enraged. I mean, it was really like this white hot thing, and I hadn't seen that at Raul's, actually. I hadn't seen that at the punk shows I'd been to so far. I think what that night showed me was, and to see the Dicks as truly angry, righteously angry men, I think what it showed me was that a lot of what was happening at Raul's before that was performed anger, was theatrical in some ways, anger.
Yeah, it's amazing. There's a documentary called The Dicks from Texas that Cindy Marbarita did.
Yes.
In 2004, and you can tell it's self-produced, made from the heart. It's like so low budget.
Yes.
It's like natural light. The sound is dipping in and out, but also it's like, will a Dicks documentary ever get made if I don't do it? You know what I mean? It has that spirit to it. But one of the things in it is David Yao says the idea had never crossed his mind that you could be scared of a band before until he saw the Dicks.
Yeah.
And I never saw the Dicks. My band played with Sister Double Happiness, and by that point, it was a totally different thing in terms of energy coming off the stage from Gary Floyd. But in your photographs and in this documentary, like, Gary Floyd is one of the most like piercing front people ever. A lot of he is just taking in everyone and giving them a piece of the mind. And if you're caught in his gaze, you can't get away from it. He just, the way he's so focused with his rage, you're absolutely right. It's internal, and he shakes it off. He always does this kind of amazing head shake, but he's not a singer who closes his eyes when he sings. They're wide open. And so I can't even imagine seeing them back in the day.
That's a good description of him. Yeah, I mean, I could barely look at them that night, and I was very intimidated by them. I think Cindy's movie really is what you say. It's raw and it's low budget, but I think it's got all of it's got all the stories. There's my one sort of thing I would add there is, unfortunately, I think it could have used a little bit of an edit in that some of the people are saying things that would would hit harder if you knew the context. So there's people that are naming
Yes.
people and things and places without the viewer really knowing what they're talking about enough.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I had to go online and look up, like, okay, who's Chuck Lopez at this moment? Like, it's definitely a very insular documentary. Like, it's like, this is made, of course, you know who these people are, but I do love that, Gary, as he talks in it, his beard length changes all the time. It's like definitely made over the years. And
even his voice changes.
Yeah. And it was really fun to hear him talk about them being a flyer band. Like, basically, I got a band.
Yeah. We're playing at 1313 Park Way.
Yeah. And then there's a great story now, who is Chuck Lopez? So I said the name, like, now that I'm expecting the listeners now to know.
The Dicks, for a time, the main people, I think that would be Buff and Glenn, I believe, lived in a place called Little Mexico. It was just an apartment complex where 2 or 3 apartments close to each other were rented by people that knew each other in the Dicks and in the punk scene. So, and it happened to be, it was sort of the headquarters of the Dicks. So Chuck and Manolo Lopez lived there with, in a separate apartment, I believe. I never went, but lived there as well as Glenn and Buff, I believe, unless it was Gary that lived there. But anyway, that was the sort of base of operations for the Dicks. And then in the film, you also hear from, I believe it's Chuck and Manolo's sister was Roxanne. There was Roxanne, Bird, Dolores, and Cindy Marabito, and they were collectively known as the Torn Panties, who supposedly backed up the Dicks in the early shows. I also didn't ever see that.
And on the record, they're listed as singing. I think
that's right. There's kind of an R&B sort of a crooned a song where Gary's almost crooning to like the people that he loves and that love him, and I think that they might be on that number. So, I think that was what was going on at Little Mexico, and it's certainly true that the Dicks in Texas was made on a budget, but I was just thinking about it, and the scenes where Cindy, who really was kind of one of that crew, is interviewing her old friends, the Torn Panties, in their in somebody's bedroom, and they're all just sitting there with like a blanket over their legs, and it's like a slumber party. And I mean,
totally,
that's kind of brilliant, in a way.
Yeah, everyone is super comfortable in it.
Yeah.
And they paint really good pictures. Chuck saying that he goes to see Lou Reed and he's super disappointed by what Lou Reed's giving, but there's someone in the audience who's like walking around throwing white powder on people, pissing them off, and he's got like a small tie and like his hair spiked up, and it's like, oh, that guy who's in the audience is the show. That's the punker, not Lou Reed. And it was Gary. I just want to read something to kind of just give context about Gary and Biscuit from your book, if that's okay.
Who told you that? Who told you that? Who told that story in the Dixon?
Chuck Lopez.
Fuck Chuck Lopez. Fuck that guy, because that is a perfect quote. That quote and that story pretty much says that's like 60% of my book. Fuck that guy. Because it's such a genius story, because it encapsulates everything. The disappointment with a rock star, the
Yes.
realization that the audience is just as much of the show as the performers on stage. And then it's like this guy, it turns out to be Gary, you know. I mean, that's such a great story. And that's in rewatching The Dicks from Texas, I realized there's a few moments like that. There's a few stories like that in there that, like I said, maybe even you don't even have to have context for that one. But you know, that's kind of the beauty of letting people tell their own stories, because they'll give you a real gem like that sometimes.
Yeah, but you're capturing amazing stories in your book, but you also have just such a great way of setting the scene. And there's a really beautiful passage in chapter 2, Pink Flamingos,
Thank you.
where you say, at the heart of the Austin punk scene were two bands, the sun and the moon of Raul's. 8 people who were so tightly bound together that they sounded like two halves of the same dirty joke, the Big Boys and the Dicks. And at the center of this was a deep friendship between 2 gay men who shared a good-natured competition and a deep mutual admiration, Randy and Gary, or as one of them would later write beneath a snapshot of them both in drag, Les Bad Bitches. Randy Biscuit Turner and Gary Floyd were both heavily influenced by the performer Divine and the films of John Waters, who once remarked, when punk came along, it was so great because we felt we had always been punks. There just wasn't a word for it. And I just think, I mean, that's lovely, Pat. You know what I mean? Like, they are. Everyone is like Beatles, Stones, sun, moon, hot, cold. And even lyrically, like, you know, the Big Boys would say, you know, we're not in it to lose. Fuck you.
Yeah.
And Gary would say, I know you'd kill me if you could. You hide your head beneath a hood. Such different approaches of anger and poetry.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah. And I felt once again that, you know, so much of what happens in these communities in underground do-it-yourself punk communities is really so much different from what the reputation of punk is. I find it really laughable that people would refer to some you know, people on the right now, or Trump voters, as like kind of the new punk because they're shocking people or they say things that are politically incorrect, as if that was what punk was really about, you know, as if being cruel or being shocking was the only thing going on. I think people profoundly misunderstand so much of the tenderness and the connection that people have when they get involved with punk. It's not every scene, and certainly there's certainly violence and sort of misogynist and misanthropic punk. But I mean, I think that in a lot of these communities, at the center of it, underneath some of those shock tactics, you have people that really deeply care for each other and do you know, anything they can to help someone out. So, you know, I was just thinking about that recently because, you know, it's ridiculous that people have this sort of, I don't know, I just think it's a very misguided view of punk and a very sort of naive view of, to think that it's just about the nastiness. I don't think it is.
No, it's like watching an NBC TV report and being like, oh, I get punk now. Right. You know what I mean? And the thing is that the thing that a lot of the bands, I can't think of a better name. The Big Boys and the Dicks had a lot of soul in their music. And I'm not talking about like soul music, even though they had funk elements and blues elements.
Yeah.
But like the Dicks album, I consider like maybe my first kind of R&B record I ever owned. Like something that was just so like kind of bluesy in its approach that I didn't know at the time. And then as you get older, you're like, oh my God, it is so Austin rock and roll at the same time, even though it's like spinning off on its own axis. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's been surprising for me to go back and really try to give the music a close listen and hear with the Dicks, but not just the Dicks. how much Texas, how much blues, how much funk and soul, and so many other things are there in the music. Poison 13 was the later group that was just very super bluesy, but it's kind of hard to hear, and it's easier to hear in Poison 13 than it is in the Dicks. But with both of those groups, it's like it's blues, but it's so distorted. It's really like it's really greasy and just noisy, and you kind of
it's messed up.
Yeah, it's messed up, and
yeah. Sister Double Happiness, when we played with them, still had those blues psychedelic garage elements, and you're like, I'm standing watching them in a pretty empty club, and I'm like, oh yeah, of course they're on SST, perfect, it's made sense. It's like, this band, no one sounds like this band, and I think that's what's cool about those bands is, it still blows my mind. And I don't know what it was like for you, but as somebody who was documenting the scene early, all of a sudden to be like, oh, that kid David Yao who's in the crowd now has scratch acid. Okay, those kids, King and Paul, all of a sudden they're doing something to the Butthole Surfers.
Yeah.
It must have been fun to be like, oh, they're on stage now. And then all of a sudden to see them all grow and become kind of magnificent and super influential.
Yeah, I mean, it was the strongest for me was with Yao and David Sims and David Yao both, because they were some of the first people I met at Raul's, at the first punk club that I went to. So they were just like, honestly, I just I thought David was just a fuck up. He was one of the funniest. Yao was one of the funniest humans I'd ever met. But I certainly had no idea that he would become like, a maker of great art, a performer like, really almost nobody's seen before. I mean, you could say he's from the Iggy Pop school, or people always say they took a lot, Scratch Acid took a lot from the Birthday Party. Okay, fine. But, what was shocking to me was that when the Scratch Acid EP came out, their first record came out, I was like, oh my God, I know people that made this. I know the people that made this piece of art. This is art. I know these people.
It is absolutely.
It was just, I couldn't believe it. What's interesting is that at the time, I could tell the record was like great and important, but I didn't start treating David differently. I just kept going to the shows. He was still just like David, he was still hilarious.
In the book, he's constantly like like he's trying to be in on things and then like getting hit with bottles because people don't understand. No, this was all a setup. And he just seems to constantly being just getting hurt.
It's true.
But he was also, it's so funny.
It's true. He's like the Buster Keaton of Texas punk. He's like, he's amazingly able to dodge the train that's coming towards him. And, that's, I think my friend Karen says that he's probably made out of gristle, because he just seems indestructible.
When I remember first reading about the band Enforced Exposure before hearing the EP.
Yeah.
And I remember they were describing the show they're playing, and they're like, the lead singer is he's reaching in the back of his pants and throwing shit at the audience. But it was just cookie dough that he'd put in there. And I was like, I need to hear this record. And then I get it, and I'm like, it's kind of beautiful. I was blown away. I was like expecting like this really sideways, like, noisy, indestructible kind of piece of music, a record.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh my God, there's cellos on here. And it's a real look into like, I just thought they were really masterful. It sounds funny, but it took me a while to get into Jesus Lizard because I was such a huge Scratch Acid fan of those records. I just thought they were really cryptic and haunted. And it was so weird. I kind of always forget that they were from Texas, It's so weird.
Yeah. I think Scratch Acid kind of ruined me for Jesus Lizard.
Me too.
Always liked Jesus Lizard. But the big shock of realizing, I think part of also my shock at hearing the first Scratch Acid record was although I couldn't put it in those words at the time, was just that, I was hearing somebody that I knew kind of reach for the stars, and reach for making something that's art, and something that is an ambitious sort of effort. And they still, I think, the guys in the group still don't really use it, don't say it in exactly those words. But in Texas, we were brought up not to, even though there's this stereotype of the Texan as a braggart and somebody who talks really loud about everything he's done, there's also a sort of a countercurrent to that, and you're not really supposed to brag on yourself so much. You're supposed to be another good Texan is the modest, aw shucks type of Texan, and part of that means that you don't say, "I'm going to make a great piece of art." You would never say that in our circle. You could say that I wanted to make something that kicked ass, or I wanted to make something that was really awesome. But you I think people tried to play down their ambitions and their pretensions. So for me, that makes it even more kind of poignant that these guys that grew up in Texas and had came from sort of humble aesthetic beginnings, were really trying to do something important and for the ages.
It's funny you mentioned being humble, because I'm curious about your chapter on the Butthole Surfers, because, I had the Blind Eye Sees All VHS tape
Yes.
before I ever got to see them, and saw them shortly after. So I saw them during like Rembrant Pussyhorse era.
Okay.
But at the end of this VHS tape, where they're already kind of getting into their powers, there's footage of Gibby, a different drummer, the first drummer, and Paul playing as a trio doing Barbecue Pope. They can barely hold it together. Like, Paul can barely play guitar, let alone sing at the same time. And then you flash forward a few years, and he's like made a deal with the devil or something. He's like so talented. Like, what was it like seeing their growth in the Texas scene?
I didn't see anything that was so early that I thought they can't play. Let's just say that by the time I saw them, and I saw them fairly early, but by the time I saw them, it was probably like 83 or so.
Okay.
And they already knew enough to play with all the signs and semaphores of punk in a way that was super interesting, because they were putting things together in a way that was really different. And they were also, as a live act, they were using all this low tech sort of pyrotechniques that were really just this is even before I say pyrotechniques, but they weren't using fire yet, but they were just using just really ingenious, super bargain basement tricks on stage, like singing through a toilet paper roll, a roll of a that was left over at the end of a toilet paper roll, singing with that into the mic so that it would make a megaphone effect. And then of course Gibby got a megaphone, but Gibby's tumbling on stage, wrapped up and surrounded by 4 mannequins made out of newspaper and old clothes, and it looked like he was wrestling with 5 people at once, and like tearing off their arms and legs and emerging from that and singing the first verse of the first song. Just crazy, super, like I say, like garage sale, stage gimmicks, and I love the fact that you could see how cheap and silly the stagecraft was, but it was still super effective. And also just that they played, particularly Paul, played these riffs that were really like heaven for a hard rock guy like me to hear. I mean, Paul was a little bit more into groups that I didn't know, like I didn't know Grand Funk that well, and he was really into Blue Oyster Cult. But it made perfect sense to me as somebody that grew up with hard rock, because his playing was like, melodic but hard. It was melodic but super chunky.
Yeah.
It was like the riffs were all there.
That's amazing. And it was like kind of dreamy and swirly, but like had a punch. And I remember when I finally got to see them, I actually roadied for the opening band, the Hell Cows. And I remember spending some time with them backstage. And of course, Gibby was not making any sense, but it was entertaining. But yeah, every time I saw them, I was like, maybe this is how I'm going to die tonight. Like, it's packed.
Yeah.
The exits here suck.
Yeah.
There's fire. I'm seeing my first naked woman on stage dancing with a gourd between her legs. It just was so oppressively beautiful.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to ask you, because I know that you got to spend some time with them as they recorded Rembrant Pussyhorse.
Yes. Yeah.
And you said that this band that, a lot of people would think were like really, scattered and, frantic, were real artists when they were making that record and very meticulous.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you tell me some moments that you remember from watching them create that record?
I mean, I think that I'm thinking back, and I always think of my pictures. I remember they just took a long time recording King on a snare drum, just trying to get the right hit, just trying to get the right sound from King. And I remember that Gibby was really, there were moments where Gibby was really trying to sing. You wouldn't think that from the records, but he was really, kind of doing a crooning thing, and just, they just took it super seriously. They really wanted to make the right sounds and to get the perfect thing. They actually, I sort of weaseled my way into that situation by offering to give Ray Washam from the Big Boys and Scratch Acid a ride to the studio so that they could record him. I don't know, doing some drumming or some piano playing. I don't know if they ever used any of that or if they even recorded him. But I brought Ray, and he hung out for a while, and then he split. But I stayed, and just the fact that they wanted to get Ray to sort of be involved, I think it sort of shows some seriousness.
Yeah.
They didn't just go into the studio for 4 or 5 hours and just kind of do some live tracks. They were already, in fact, I didn't see any full band takes that in those days. I think I was there for about 2 full days and a half, maybe. It was all just a vocal here, a snare kick there, so they were just like, they were just kind of polishing the headlights and rotating the tires, but they were pretty they were pretty fastidious about it. So I was impressed by their work ethic. They were working, I'd say they were working 10, 12 hours a day.
Yeah. And then you get the record, and I just remember I was pen pals with somebody at Ralph Records, where the Residents were part of, that was their record label. And the person running the office, we were tape trading. So he was sending me like Fats Waller, and I was sending him Rembrant Pussyhorse. And he said, this sounds like the 13th Floor Elevators. And I'd not heard them yet, right? Because I was a teenager. But it blew my mind when I finally heard Rocky Erickson and just be like, oh, yeah, there's a lot of Rocky on Rembrant Pussyhorse, especially in Gibby's singing.
I don't know if I'd even say that now. I mean, that's really an interesting comment. I didn't hear that. That's a super weird record. It's not my favorite by them by any means, but it's pretty damn weird.
It's Do you mind
if I ask who was the person at Ralph's that said that?
Yeah, his name is Robert Ellison.
Okay.
And he did like the mail order and helped around, and he also worked at Moe's Books. And it was fun. We reconnected a couple years ago when I was on tour. And it's just so funny because, like, he's now like a really, he's a successful food and wine writer in the Bay Area. And so he showed up and he brought us a bunch of great wine. It was really nice.
Okay. That's nice too. Yeah.
Yeah. But he would always, be like, the Residents say hi and stuff like that. But we had an incredible relationship back and forth with just him cracking me open to Beefheart and Hector Zazu and all this stuff that, and meanwhile I'm sending him like Zen Arcade and,
Yes, good.
and Murmur. But yeah, it was really fun.
We claim the Residents now as a Texas group because of what we've discovered about Hardy Fox and him coming from East Texas. So it's as the international ambassador and custodian of Texas punk rock, I am claiming the Residents now. It's not just Louisiana's group anymore. But
it makes so much sense.
Yeah, it makes sense when you there's a great Texas Monthly article about Hardy Fox. But back to 13-4 Elevators, I never would have been able to put those two things together until much later either. But I did, while working on the book, really kind of do a deep dive into their records and noticed a lot more, even like folk and country in their later records, like Hairway to Steve. And there's definitely some kind of playing around with folksy country, acoustics there. And
right,
I think that they were also super ambitious as a band, maybe probably even more ambitious than anybody else in the book. I mean, in the scene.
Yeah, it seems like it. Like they definitely were. You talked about kind of this humbleness of being like, we're going to kick ass, but I feel like the Butthole Surfers were more domination oriented.
Yeah.
And rightfully so. They were so good.
Yeah. But they also just worked really hard. I mean, I'm not sure if, I've really been rereading a lot of the things that sort of inspired me a long time ago. I've been rereading and for the first time reading things that I should have read before, like Michael Azerod's book on Nirvana, and the real Come As You Are, and the real one of the tragic things about that group, and especially about Kurt Cobain, is he wanted to be a rock star very badly, but then he didn't like it when he got there. He didn't know what he was asking for, and I think he was a super troubled, unhappy dude. He didn't get enough, as a kid. I don't think he had the life that he wanted. And I think that a similar thing might be able to be said about the Buttholes, that I think that they tried really hard to be the best band on the planet. For a time, I was certain they were the best band on the planet. But I don't think they liked it when they got there, when they got sort of to the top and onto the charts. And I don't think they were happy with what they found there. They were never like Nirvana in the sense that they were never going to have that kind of success because they were just too damn weird. But they did have, a commercial breakthrough, and they did kind of make an impression on the world. And I don't know. I mean, I think especially Gibby. Yeah, it's kind of sad that they tried so hard to get something that once they achieved, they weren't. It wasn't what they expected. So
sure,
that's a little bit. That's another sad note in their story, I think. But I mean, there's not that many. I think they pretty much achieved what they wanted to. They blew the world's mind,
Yeah, those records were events.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and you were waiting, and then the first, you wouldn't hear any of the music. You just saw the cover, and you're like, what am I looking at?
Yeah.
And it was super influential. And I think as many people who say like, oh, REM were the band that everyone wanted to kind of be like in terms of, oh, we're going to, equal publishing or this or that, or kind of a democracy, or at least from the outside, it looked like a democracy and kind of arty.
Yeah.
And look, they did it on their own terms. Butthole Surfers were right there with them in terms of like just the artistry, keeping like making the statements they wanted to make, and like, you have to move along with us. We're moving fast.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, as much renown as they have, and as much attention that they got, and critical acclaim, I think that the Buttholes got. I think there's still way too much attention paid to how crazy their live performances were, and how it was just insane and wow, fire and stuff. But it's like, those fucking records are really good, they're really like different and strange, and I think they're years ahead of their time in many ways, in the way that they were sort of sampling styles and playing with the recording studio. So, I think it's an interesting comparison with REM, because of course there was a kind of there was a connection. Allegedly the Buttholes were stalking Michael Stipe or REM when they lived in Georgia. But it's it's an interesting possibility, because I think that the Buttholes did genuinely like some music like that, and probably REM itself. They probably liked.
I think they did too.
I think they liked the music, and I would imagine that somebody like Peter Buck liked the Buttholes. So.
Oh, absolutely. I guarantee it. Next time I'm at his house, I'll make sure. And if he doesn't have any, I'll just throw some in.
Yeah. Just slip some into his collection and see if he ever notices.
I just have a question about the Big Boys. There's footage of them. There's a lot of live footage you can watch. There's the Flipside VHS tapes and things like that.
Yes.
But they played the Austin Chronicle Award Show in '84. And really confrontational show that they kind of didn't want to do, but they were getting an award, and they felt like they weren't. It's a weekly, right? The Chronicle.
Yes.
Yeah, that they weren't really super supportive of elements of the scene, and so they're like conflicted, but they decide to do it, and it's a really confrontational show between the bouncers and the audience, and eventually the bouncers and the band.
Yeah.
And the band walks off after Tim is hit by a bouncer. And it's funny, in '84, it's still like, oh, this is provocative, and this is political, and this is dangerous, and still like, you watch the footage and people, the majority of people in the audience don't know what to make of the Big Boys. They're just like, they can't wrap their head around it.
Yeah.
And that's late. By that point, you have plenty of time to catch up on things that at least would be a gateway to the Big Boys, because the Big Boys were catchy. They wrote really great songs.
Yeah. And I wasn't there. I haven't seen that footage. I'd like to see it. If you have a link somewhere, I'd like to see it. But
I'll put links to all this stuff in the show notes.
So great.
And to your book as well.
Okay, thank you. But two things that occurred to me. I believe if it was a Chronicle Award show, there's a good chance it was at a place called the Austin Opry House, or another venue that had a significant Willie component, meaning it could have been Willie Nelson's production team, or his security team, or one of his venues where that happened. That would be my first question to ask about that event. The second thing that I think, and which may have meant that the Big Boys ran afoul of the security team, because those were rough dudes, and at that time, Willie Nelson's 4th of July picnic and his ascendancy as the kind of performer that he became was super present in Austin. Willie had a lot of power in Austin, and he was bringing in money to the scene in some ways. And I think that there, although I think the guy is a cool guy, very cool guy, there was also a kind of a rough biker element to some of his audience and some of his team, I think. And I believe the Big Boys may have run afoul of them on more than one occasion. That might be part of what.
Yeah, they mentioned Fiesta Garden show that the same thing happened at, but right before this.
That's possible. That's possible. I wouldn't want to say too much more because I'm not sure, but I suspect that could have been one of the dynamics. The other is that I know more about, is that the Chronicle the Chronicle was started by people that were at Raul's, by people that were actually at the Huns riot at Raul.
Oh wow,
Yeah,
okay. It was started that late.
yeah, no, yeah. The
Okay.
Chronicle didn't start to come into. I'm not sure when it began to be published. It was around 81 or so. I'm not sure exactly, but it was started by Lewis Black and Nick Barbaro, and there were a couple other partners, Lewis Myers, but Lewis Black and Nick Barbaro were Raul's regulars, and they started the Chronicle, and they were kind of a little bit more a part of the first wave. They were RTF people, and they were a little bit more enamored of the first wave groups, I think. And Lewis would be pissed off if he heard me say this, but I believe it's true. That they kind of stuck with that crew when younger groups like the Dicks and especially Butthole Surfers and Scratch Acid came along, and the Big Boys were sort of in the middle of that. They were a first wave group that became more important in the second wave. But the Chronicle wasn't truly, I think, truly supportive of punk rock. It was a little bit beneath them, one felt. And the other music critic in town, Ed Ward, who's a great music writer, he was writing for the Austin American Statesman, the newspaper there, but also same thing. The Statesman and the Chronicle, they weren't really sold on Big Boys, Dicks. That it was too wild and disgusting, and it was. I don't think it was artful enough for them in some way.
Right.
And it also wasn't like musically accomplished enough. None of which I cared about. The second wave was my jam. Those were my people, but I think there was a certain lack of support from some of the press and some of the local critics at the time. Some of them came back to it and realized the importance of those groups later. Like in my book, I quote Lewis Black as saying something super smart about the Buttholes, and I love that quote. And I think he got to something, he really articulated something about them when he talked about their humanism. But at the time, 80s or so, the Chronicle was more interested in bands like the Tailgaters or the Fabulous Thunderbirds.
Sure.
The more sort of Stevie Ray Vaughan, they were making sure they covered the more commercial stuff, I think.
Yeah. I mean, this book here about Portland, punk scene from 77.
Okay.
Tate one called All Ages. Same thing. Like you open it up and it's like the weekly says Punk Club, weird. And then you go here and it says Punk Outburst fades into Northwest Drizzle. And it's like the Wipers and the Neo Boys, like these amazing bands. And people were just, the same story happened here when I talked to people before I got into the scene here. It was just a little before my time. They're like, yeah, they did not cover us. They did not support us. They thought it was noise. And you're like, some of these bands were some of the most inventive and melodic bands you'll ever have. It's so weird,
Yeah.
But I'm just always shocked that even into almost the mid 80s, there was still people who are just like, no, that's too ugly or that's too weird. And, we need to, support this other thing that's going to make it no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's something you would consider, as a film or something that you would consider part of your sort of your wheelhouse. But I think a case in point is this MTV show that came to Austin in 1985.
Cutting Edge.
And
yeah, I talked to Carlos Grasso, who was the one of the producers of it. Yeah.
My boss. Yeah, I was the still photographer for the episode, so I was like,
"Oh wow, that's amazing!" Because we've talked to Jay Boberg, we talked to a bunch of IRS people. So
yeah, and it was Jonathan Ferris and Valerie Dayton. They went on to make some pretty good movies. But the pick of the groups that were on that show does speak a little bit to this idea of what's good and proper, what's real music and not. Like, think about who they chose that turned out to have great commercial success was Timbuk 3. who none of us had ever heard of before, and I never cared about after I heard them. And then, they did
IRS signed them,
IRS signed them.
Yeah.
And then they did not cover Scratch Acid or the Butthole Surfers.
No.
They included Poison 13, which I think was a good move, but I don't think Poison 13 came off well. The one thing that was a real wild card in the show was Daniel Johnston, who just invited himself into the production.
Yeah, completely accidental.
And that alone was worth it for that.
Yes, I saw that episode in real time. So I was Glass Eye or the
Glass Eye, I believe, are also in it too.
Yeah,
they are, and the Reavers as well. Yes.
Yeah, and when I talked to Jay Boberg of IRS, he really wanted to sign the Reavers.
Yes,
he was like they were amazing, but it's very like college rock.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah,
and there's no kind of edges on it. But I remember, that Daniel Johnston. Like, I just assumed he was a known thing because of the way the audience reacted. But what an amazing story of him just, like, basically just scamming his way on and then just blowing people's minds. And then IRS Cutting Edge is getting, like, tons of mail being like, who is this?
Yeah, what is?
Where can I buy these records?
Yeah.
And you couldn't.
Yeah.
And it's such a funny... that's amazing that you were doing the still photography for that.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about Daniel is that, like, he was such a dark horse in that show. Timbuk 3 had a great hit. Had great success after the show, but it's like years from now, all these years later, Daniel's fame, I'm not even sure if it's really peaked yet, and I don't think people really talk about Timbuk 3 in the same hushed tones, not to take anything away from them. I think they're nice people. I've heard they're nice people. But I mean, Daniel has had this really odd career trajectory that people are just fascinated by that guy. And I understand.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Pat, thank you so much for coming on. I'm going to kiss your book right now. Mwah. It is fantastic. Again, I will put a link to where people can get Someday All the Adults Will Die. And I also really recommend your the photography book that you did prior to this.
Thank you very much. That's called Texas is the Reason. And I'm really happy with both of them. They're like, those two books are like my brother, my husband.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, at the end of every episode, Pat, I ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on what we're talking about.
Okay.
So on a scale of 1 beer bottle being the lowest and 6 beer bottles being the highest, how many beer bottles grabbed out of the air that were being thrown at you from a passing car filled with frat kids that you then turn around and throw back at the car to perfectly smash out that back window do you give Texas Punk on a scale of 1 beer bottle to 6 beer bottles?
Oh, well, 10 beer bottles, of course.
That's absolutely right, because you know what? That's what I had here too, at 10. That's exactly right. That's the only answer. It was a trick question. And by the way, if you go to Texas, beer only comes in a 10-pack. It's a little known fact. Pat, so good to meet you. And again, congrats on the book and everything. And I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you very much, Chris. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday on your favorite podcast app and additional bonus episodes every Sunday on our Patreon. The show is a completely independent affair, so the best way to support the show is through our Patreon at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get weekly bonus episodes and shows, exclusive limited edition flexi discs and records and CDs featuring guests that have appeared on the show, and other exclusive goods sent to you just for joining. You can follow us on social media at Revolutions Per Movie and also find out more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye.